I'm Dana Shagru with CEAg World Greenhouse Produce, an innovative brand that engages with the rapidly expanding global greenhouse produce industry through a variety of platforms. Our mission is to educate and connect greenhouse produce growers and industry allies to help them better understand and sustainably advance the global food industry. On this episode of CEAg Talks, I'll be speaking with Veillon, an expert marketer with 17 years of experience in the fresh produce industry. Over the years, Chris has worked for a variety of successful greenhouse produce operations, using his marketing expertise to drive growth, innovation, and conversation around the brands he works with. Chris, welcome back to CEAg Talks.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to see you.
Today, we're talking about the difference between locally grown and regionally grown produce. So to begin, can you define locally grown and regionally grown produce for us?
Well, it is up much for interpretation of what the difference is between the two. If you look at locally grown, for decades, most thought locally grown was the farmer's fruit stand that was, down the street and so forth. And then as the idea of CEA or greenhouse grown or hydroponic grown, whatever you want to call it, but greater emphasis, the locally grown started to be more focused on areas specifically. So if you look at certainly where we are in the upper Midwest, the Ohios of the world, into Indiana and then further over to New York, the local grown got to be a very hot topic. So, state programs such as Ohio Proud, where you are in Ohio is a great program. I had an opportunity to work on that program collaboratively about 8 to 10 years ago. And it was gaining momentum, but consumers start to recognize what that locally grown in-state program got to be, a lot more attention per se. When you start thinking about regionally grown programs, you're starting to think the entire Midwest or the upper Northeast. For years ago, Backyard Farms was a pioneer to the extent of what a regionally grown program was coming out of Maine. And they were since acquired by Mastronardi Sunset, about 8 or 9 years ago. But those types of programs that were servicing an entire region, had built and created a pretty dedicated following of consumers that were buying from that region specifically. But you look, fast forward to today, when you think locally grown, it can be upwards of 100 miles to 400 miles. There is a huge push and development and capital investment in regional programs that are very much focused on very specific areas that would be growing fresh vegetables and fruits and vegetables in greenhouses. So when someone says locally grown versus regionally grown, I think it's much interpretation. I think most people think that if it's grown within X miles from me, that's grown probably better grown close to home versus local versus regional.
Now, would you say there are benefits to each type of produce, or if consumers are more drawn, you would say, to locally grown produce?
Absolutely. There are a number of programs that are out there right now that are gaining significant momentum by being actually locally grown. Perfect example, if you look at down in Texas, with HEB, Rebel Greens just opened up a brand new facility in the last, I think, 10 months for leafy greens, and nearly in the entirety of their production is focused in the Texas market. Years ago when I worked on the Ohio Proud program with Nature Fresh, the huge selling point was Ohio Proud tomatoes grown right there in the state of Ohio. If you even look more so, most recently in the last year, if you look at Bosch growers, a Dutch grower that came across the pond with decades of experience of growing bell peppers are now growing strawberries in Kentucky at a phenomenal facility that they had taken ownership of. But the idea of locally grown products, it's certainly from the CEA aspect has been around for a very long time. You look in Utah, the days of Howling when they were there, Casey Howling. You look into California with Winsett, John and Steve Newell. Even up into in expanding into Ohio, you've got all the major players pretty much. You've got the Red Suns of the world that had been there. You have Mastronardi that's there in Wapakoneta. And you also have Nature Fresh that's there in Delta. So the local idea is not new, but consumers are starting to be a little more savvy where their products are grown from, and are actually looking specifically, certainly by their devices, to find out, hey, where is this product where's this product actually come from? And much to their surprise, there's really not a lot of content out there. And many grower marketers should learn that, consumers are much more savvy than they were 5 years ago, and the ability to access to digital content. So, use that to your advantage.
For sure. And I know earlier you mentioned that locally grown versus regionally grown produce is the hot topic right now. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Well, it's the notion of, that's the notion that we hear of inflation. We hear more and more about food miles. We hear more about sustainability. Consumers are spending more time at retail researching where the product comes from. They want to buy a product that, supports local growers and such, and that's why you've seen these pockets of growing areas throughout the US and into Canada too, that are gaining significant momentum because, the value of being able to be grown year round and that consistency of supply, that product that hasn't traveled, 2,000 miles from California to all the way to the East Coast, or, travel all the way from Central America or Southern Mexico all the way up into the Northeast. Consumers are spending more and more time looking for that product. And now with, the capital investment that's out there in the M&As, there are, the ability to get locally grown lettuce is taking off. You hear about the berries, for example, and strawberries and raspberries. That is the fastest growing segment in protected agriculture when it comes to berries. The inconsistencies in quality that you see from other regions because of the amount of miles that they have to travel as well. They're being picked at a younger age, where the product you're buying locally can be picked and shipped to you within a day's time versus a 3 to 5 day transfer time.
So as a marketer, since consumers are getting smarter around, where their produce comes from, what advice would you have for growers or companies hoping to sell their product, whether it's locally grown versus regionally grown?
Well, there's a lot of hefty debate online. Even as recently as this morning, as mentioned before we got on the call, Tom Karst posted to the fresh produce industry discussion, and the question was, to most consumers, the appeal of locally grown fruits and vegetables is ... And there were three options: about the same as 5 years ago, less than 5 years ago, and more than 5 years ago. So you're looking now, and to date, there 47% of the people think that consumers are having stronger appeal than they did 5 years ago. So when growers are looking to kick off their marketing programs and such, thinking a little closer to home can have a significant value and certainly draw a greater return per kilo when you have the ability to ship something, within a 25 to 100 mile radius versus going, 400 to 600 miles. So, building those strong relationships with more locally programs that, for example, Kroger has a local program, Publix has a local program, HEB, as we just spoke about with Revel, Tom Thompson and their team at Revel are doing a great job there. So, when growers are looking about bringing the products to market, the value to a local retailer is that consistency of supply, the freshness of the product that's being delivered to them within, steps from their DC or such. So there's an opportunity there to hone and build those relationships and then create a stronger value proposition for what you have as a local grower, so to speak, as your first step.
Well, I think you've established the differences between locally grown and regionally grown produce, as well as how to market them to different consumers. But is there anything else that our viewers should know about locally grown and regionally grown produce, would you say?
Well, when you start looking at, and certainly we're focused on CEA, that's the future of fresh. The idea here is that we are seeing significant capital investment in protected agriculture, the ability to provide that consistency of supply. And that's the most important part of this conversation, to fuel the locally grown, originally grown message. The ability to provide that consistency of supply year round, because you're moving the seasonality aspect of it, has so much more of a draw. It's difficult to penetrate retail when the landscape is so saturated with so many different products and brands and so forth. But, be able to hone a very specific value proposition to why your product is better than the competing product on the shelf. The locally grown message can have a very strong impact, but it's on how you deliver the story. And I think there are many growers out there, both small, medium, and large brands, that can learn a lot from how to tell an effective story. Peeling back the layers has been, the success, to building a great story over the last 15 or 17 years, opportunity of working some great brands to do that. Some value it, some do not, but the moment you stop talking about your story, you become irrelevant. So create content that's relevant to the consumer, and you'd be very surprised how quickly they react.
That's great advice. Chris, thank you again for joining us again on CEAg Talks. We look forward to talking with you again soon, I'm sure.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dana.